Hello, friends. I'm Vitaly Portnikov. The President of the United States, Donald Trump, has announced that nuclear submarines have approached Russia. Earlier, Trump emphasized that he gave the order to redeploy these submarines after statements made by former President of the Russian Federation and Deputy Chairman of Russia's Security Council, Medvedev. Now, President Trump states that Dmitry Medvedev possesses an excessively sharp tongue, and consequently, he issues a direct order to immediately redeploy the submarines. We still do not know what the American president means when he talks about such a redeployment. The formidable United States Armed Forces are comprehensively equipped with an impressive array of both advanced submarines that are powered by highly efficient nuclear engines, and also with incredibly potent submarines specifically designed and fully capable of deploying nuclear weapons to strike with precision anywhere across the entire globe on Earth. And until now, none of the presidents of the United States has ever announced their redeployment. Donald Trump was indeed the very first president to strategically utilize such a significant and impactful announcement as a powerful tool to exert considerable pressure on another sovereign country. But it is clear that the announcement by the American president that American submarines, which obviously carry nuclear weapons, have approached the Russian Federation is a demonstration that Washington is capable of moving from the war of words, which has recently been taking place between the leadership of the United States and the leadership of Russia, to a real war of action. After all, it is obvious that the idea of relocating submarines with nuclear weapons closer to the shores of the Russian Federation opens up the possibility of a new arms race, which is unlikely to please Russian President Putin, whose entire military resources are currently focused on the war with Ukraine. And he is not ready for any serious confrontation with the United States, even when it comes to an arms buildup. But it may be that, as of today, the Kremlin will ignore these statements by Trump as unverifiable and potentially used by the American president for propaganda purposes. At the same time, it is interesting to see what the next step of the Russian leadership will be after this statement by the American leader. After all, it is clear that Donald Trump is determined when it comes to nuclear threats from the Kremlin. Until now, the nuclear rhetoric espoused not only by Medvedev but also by other Russian officials had not met with such a loud and public response from the leaders of Western countries. Perhaps some individuals genuinely believed that responding to the rather provocative words of an official like Dmitry Medvedev would hardly be considered appropriate or even wise from the precise perspective of those who actually make significant and impactful decisions within the Russian Federation. Or perhaps they thought that the very discussion of nuclear war is unacceptable, as it opens a real Pandora's box. Trump decided to take a different approach, to show the leadership of the Russian Federation that juggling nuclear threats could lead not only to responses from the US State Department or the Pentagon, but also to changes in the actions of the US Department of Defense on the ground, as Putin himself likes to say. Well, in this case, in the ocean. And Russia, of course, if it truly wants to maintain the significant prestige of a powerful and influential nuclear state, will absolutely have to respond to Trump not merely with Medvedev's often provocative posts on social media platforms, but rather by strategically and decisively redeploying its own formidable weapons in a manner that demonstrably creates real and substantial problems for the United States and its allies. Russian propaganda is already vociferously calling for at least the immediate deployment of their advanced Oreshnik missile systems in various Latin American and Caribbean countries. Obviously, this refers to countries like Venezuela or Cuba. And in this way, we are moving at an incredible speed if, of course, the leadership of the Russian Federation not only emphasizes such intentions, but actually carries them out toward a new Cuban Missile Crisis, toward Russia's desire to deploy weapons dangerous to the United States in immediate proximity to the United States. At one time, the reckless venture of the former First Secretary of the CPSU Central Committee, Nikita Khrushchev, in deploying Soviet missiles in Cuba became a true prelude to World War III. It took considerable efforts from both American and Soviet diplomacy, behind-the-scenes meetings, and negotiations for Khrushchev and then US President John Kennedy to resolve the issue and for the Soviet missiles to be relocated from Cuba. But now we are dealing with leaders who are much less cautious than Khrushchev and Kennedy. We understand the size of Putin's ego, who is fighting not just for control over our country, but also to turn Russia into a true political hegemon of Europe. And the only tool to make this a reality for the Russian president is fear. The nuclear threat makes this fear tangible. But at the same time, we are also dealing with Donald Trump, who respects not only the national interests of his own country, but also his own ego. And of course, in such a profoundly serious and volatile situation, the American president is highly unlikely to respond coolly or with detached indifference to direct and explicit threats from the leadership of the Russian Federation to potentially use devastating nuclear weapons if Washington does not immediately withdraw its steadfast and unwavering support for Ukraine in its ongoing and brutal war against unprovoked Russian aggression. So today we can say that against the backdrop of American submarines armed with nuclear weapons approaching the shores of Russia, the prospect of a real, not a fantastical, nuclear war between the two nuclear superpowers of the modern world has become more realistic than it was just a few weeks ago. And it may turn out that the calculation by one side that the other will be ready to capitulate in the face of the threat of a nuclear strike could, as so often happens in world politics, prove to be incorrect and ill-considered. And then the world will find itself facing the reality of a true nuclear war between the United States and its allies, and Russia and that country's allies. This will be the main event of the 21st century. Of course, if we fail to stop Putin's aggression and force aggressive states to abandon their ambitions right now. Thank you, friends. Stay on this channel.